Well, good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to Evan and to Mark and to the Pachyderm board members for giving me this opportunity to speak to you tonight. And I want to thank all of you for coming, because there's probably other places you could be, but you chose to be here. And I'm glad you are, because I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk tonight about a topic which is a very important topic. I can clearly remember, and Jim already said that this is, we're celebrating Dr. King's birthday. I remember being in high school. I clearly remember when it became a national holiday. I don't know how many of you remember, but nobody remembers. Yes, I clearly remember that moment when I was a high school student, and it became a holiday. It was first observed in 1986, and it was after it had been signed into law by President Reagan in 1983. And one of the things that I want to point out and highlight is that it's not, as some people might say, a black holiday. It's not a black holiday because it's Martin Luther King's Day. It is an American holiday. And when you think about Dr. King and the fact that this is a holiday, how rare it is that a private citizen is given that national holiday. It's an amazing thing. And he was really an ordinary person. When I go and I speak, I do motivational speaking, and when I talk to students in high school or junior high school, one of the things that I point out is the fact that he was an ordinary person, but he had something on the inside of him that stood out. And so it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter where you came from, that you can do extraordinary things. And those of us who know anything about Dr. King, we understand that he was not a perfect man. In fact, as time goes on, we're finding more and more how flawed he was. And that's something that a lot of times people don't want to talk about. But he was not a perfect man, and yet he did amazing things, which tells us that God can use us no matter where we are, right? So let me explain something. You guys okay to say yes and amen now and then? It's all good, okay? But he was a private citizen who did extraordinary things. And today, as Jim said, is his actual birthday. On January 15th, 1929, he was born. And so I'm honored to be here on what would be his 86th birthday and talk about his dream. And tonight's topic actually is Dr. King's dream. Where are we now? Where are we now? And I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that this was a tough topic for me. And I really toiled with this concept of where are we now? And trying to gather my thoughts, trying to grasp where exactly I believe we are. It's a complicated thing. And I have pages and notes, and before it's over, I may have to throw it all out or throw them in the air or whatever, because I can be long-winded, and so you might have to pull out the hook or whatever. But I struggled and struggled. It was almost painful for me. I felt like I was, I don't know, I want to say giving birth, but I've never done that. So I want to be real also. I want to be real, and I want to talk about some things that may be a little bit uncomfortable, you know. My Aunt Alma, who helped raise me, and some people are familiar with her just because I talk about her a lot on Facebook, and I share some of the things that she says, and she's just hilarious. She comes up with the craziest things and a lot of common sense things, but no matter what the topic is, she often says, for the simple reason that, it doesn't matter what she's explaining, she always says, for the simple reason that, and it doesn't even matter if it's not simple. I was talking to her last night, and I said to her, she was explaining to me why she did not check her voicemail. Well, she didn't check her voicemail for the simple reason that she doesn't know how. And so, and I finally said to her last night, I said, look, you're an educated woman, you have a master's degree, there's no reason in the world where you can't figure out how to check your voicemail, but for the simple reason that. And so thinking about that and thinking about this topic, I realized that there is no for the simple reason that when we start talking about Dr. King's dream, and when we start talking about where we are in relation to the fulfillment of that dream. But I want you to understand that I want to approach this from my heart and from some maybe uncomfortable things. And as I said, it's not a black holiday. So I have to approach this, number one, just as a person, just as a human being, because when we talk about his dreams, we're coming from the perspective of just being human beings. And so that's number one. But number two, I also come from the perspective of being an American. Because his dream, as he said, was deeply rooted in what? In the American dream. And so I look at the topic also from being an American. But I can't lie to you, and I have to tell you, that as a black person, in case you didn't notice, I also have to approach his legacy from that perspective. And I will. Because I can't help but look at it in terms of not just as being a person and not just being as an American, but I can't help but being a black American. I can't help but look at it in terms of that and how his dream has impacted the black community, or where we are, where the black community is. And that's sometimes where it gets a little bit, maybe a little bit difficult. But so it's a complicated issue. But before we get into that, I understand that sometimes when we talk about Dr. King, it becomes this holiday, it becomes something that we talk about once a year, and we're used to the songs, and we're used to talking about how we're going to overcome, or seeing footage of the masses marching on Washington, or talking about hopes for better opportunities and school assemblies with students reciting the only part of the I Have a Dream speech that anybody seems to remember. And we have mistakenly adopted that speech as the totality of Dr. King and the epitome of his dream. We know about not the color of your skin, but what? That we would be judged by what? By the content of our character. And that's the part that we all seem to know. And there's so much more to it. But that is a great place to stop and think about. And we're going to talk about that. So I Have a Dream. It was a speech, but there was more to the man and more to the dream than just one speech. As powerful as it was, delivered with an eloquence that we've come to associate with the greatest orators of our time, of which he was one. But you know, perhaps even more powerful than the I Have a Dream speech was the speech that we've come to know as the mountaintop speech. I don't know if you were familiar with that speech, but that was the speech that he gave the night before he was assassinated. He was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, but on April 3rd, he stood before people and he spoke what seemed to be prophecy. And he said, I'll read this portion. He said, like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, he said. And he's allowed me to go to the mountain. And I've looked and I've seen, he said, the promised land. And this is the powerful part. He says, I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. Now, think about that. As he stood there the night before he was assassinated, he said, look, I'd like to live a long life. Who wouldn't? When you go to school and they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Nobody says dead. Right? I'd like to live a long life. And he understood, because he wasn't a fool. And people were bombing his home and threatening him. And so he understood the risks. I'd like to, but there's something more important. He said, I've had a glimpse of it. I've had a vision of it, of the dream. And I may not get there. I may not live long enough to get there. But we as a people will get to the promised land. So that begs the question that I want to address tonight. Where are we now? Have we arrived at that promised land? Have we? And I'd love to actually, to be honest, I said to Christy, I would love to do like a workshop or something on this rather than a speech. You know, I would love to sit and listen to what you would have to say and how you would answer the question. And I don't know how many of you know, but I taught for 17 years. I was in my 18th year teaching in New York. I resigned last October, October of 2013 actually, and so I could easily lapse into teacher mode and put you into groups, you know, and have you discuss that question. And one of the beautiful things I loved about teaching 7th grade English language arts is that almost anything goes as long as you can use text or evidence to back up. That was, you know, before Common Core when, you know, that's a whole thing. We'll talk about that next month. I call it Common Corpse, but I digress. And I lived it, so. But anyway, I would love to sort of lapse into that place where I put you into groups and say, have we reached that place? Have we fulfilled that dream? Where are we now? And have you come back and offer your evidence for your perspective? And if we had, I don't know, 50 people in this room, I'd probably get 50 different explanations. Because it's a complicated issue. Because maybe there's just no yes or no answer. Are you with me? And so, even though I stand here tonight to speak on the topic, the truth is that it's not so simple, but we can look at what the dream was and where we are. In fact, we have to, because we're in a place right now, as far as race relations are concerned, if you haven't noticed, where it's time to talk about these things. Hello? We must talk about these things. Dialogue is essential if we're going to move forward. And some people don't want to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. And other people think we've done enough talking. And yet, if you were to be honest, you would find that a lot of times we're talking around to get where the rubber meets the road, to be real. And my question is, are you ready? Because every one of us has a role to play. Something, some part that we need to play. And if you don't notice that how essential it is right now, then you're fast asleep. But circumstances will wake you up. Because without something happening, I don't foresee it getting better. Now, when I ask that question, some people have a pie in the sky mentality about where we are. Dr. King would be proud, so we should be proud that we can pat ourselves on the back because mission accomplished. And you expect that I'm going to validate that. And then some of you have a gloom and doom perspective. We haven't gotten anywhere. Maybe you expect me to validate that. And then there are others who say, you know, we have made progress, but lately we seem to have reversed course. So I don't know where you fall in that, or if you're not, if I, you know, there's some other perspective you have that I didn't mention. So when we come to things like this, and we listen to somebody speak, a lot of times, rather than hoping to get a new perspective, we just want somebody to validate the perspective we already have. But I didn't come to validate you. I'm not really interested in validating your perspective. I came to share my perspective. And perhaps you can hear with your heart, and maybe there's something that you can gain from it. Agree, disagree, but it's a conversation that we need to have. And so even as I speak, I feel like I'm opening myself up for some some introspection, because I can't ask you to do that which I haven't done. And I've already told you I grappled with this whole thing. And I found as a teacher there would be times when I would pose a question to my students. It's interesting how you can do that. You can pose a question to others that you've not taken the time to answer for yourself. And I've done that many times, and I've had my students converse and have them share, and then they would say, well, Miss Ross, what do you think? And I realized for the first time I had not thought about it. But I have thought about this and struggled a little bit with it. Without an explanation from you, and before I even break down what I believe Dr. King's dream was, I'm going to ask you, based on what you perceive his dream to be, raise your hand if you feel like you have a good idea of what his dream was. Just if you think you have an idea of what Dr. King's dream was. shy. I mean, wow. I mean, there are actually people in the room that have no concept at all. You think you have no concept at all of what his dream was? That's interesting. Well, I'm sure glad we're having this tonight because. All right. So now here's my next question. Raise your hand if you feel that his dream has come to pass. If we have achieved that dream. Partially. I'll do it like this, what I would do with my students. If you say yes, absolutely, thumbs up. If you say absolutely not, thumbs down. If you're somewhere in the middle, thumbs to the side. Can we do that way? And I'll just read the room. Okay. I think I see we're all here. It looks like we're all here. Oh, now again, if I asked you to share why you feel that we would get some really interesting responses, but we don't have time for that. So, some people would say that Dr. King's dream was for black people to be equal, but that wasn't it. So that would be a waste of time. And that would have led to despair, because man can't make man equal. Amen. Okay? So the dream wasn't that black people would be equal. That's a task too big for man. As he quoted the Declaration of Independence in that famous I Have a Dream speech, he did not dream for equality among people. He understood that people were already equal. So he wasn't asking for equality. That wasn't the dream. He understood that the Declaration of Independence, which declared that all men are created equal, only reiterated what he knew that God had already given. Right?
Amen.
That we are all God's creatures. That we were all created in his image. That we all have a divine purpose. And he understood that. And he recited the Declaration of Independence, which declared that this was a truth that ought to be self-evident. Self-evident. It shouldn't even require conversation, really. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It's obvious that all men are created equal by the fact that they were created by a creator. We were created equal, so his dream wasn't about equality in terms of being. It was about treatment. It was about how we are treated, that we would be treated equally. That we would live out what he already knew was the case. Where are we now? Ask yourself, as I speak, where are we now? And again, his dream wasn't just a speech, but that speech covers so many things. And I just want to be honest and say, my personal perspective is that we have not achieved the dream. Have we advanced? In many ways, yes. Have we managed to live and work in closer proximity to different types of people? In many ways, yes. But have we reached the pinnacle of that dream? I say no. In some ways, we're still very much segregated. Our neighborhoods, for whatever reason. I'm not calling you racist. I'm just saying. And our neighborhoods, our churches, our schools, our political parties. Look around the room. Think about your circle that you flow in. And there are all kinds of different reasons for that, but I'm saying, when you think about your circle, does it represent everyone, quote, sitting around the table of brotherhood together, as he said? Sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, did you ever say, why not? And we have seen so much, especially recently. And we've heard so much. And we're witnessing blacks against whites and whites against blacks. Even in this state, the show me state is showing me something. And we've heard accusations of racism and of police brutality and of inequities in education and of a failed economic structure and lack of opportunity, and the list goes on. We've seen riots and violence and looting and envy and strife. We've seen frustration directed in non-constructive ways. Have you seen it?
Yeah, sure.
And we made it a political issue. When, to be honest, though our opinion often falls down political lines, and though politics have played a role, in reality, it really isn't a political issue. It's a spiritual issue. So when we relegate things to just being politics, we do ourselves, we do our country, we do the whole discourse, we do Dr. King's dream, we do your dream a huge disservice, a dangerous disservice. It's more of a spiritual issue. America can't restore America to its greatest self, to its original design. Only God can. And from our founding, men knew that God had a design for this country, but a greater design for his kingdom. And so when we first embrace his kingdom design, everything else becomes self-evident. You hear me? It's only self-evident when you embrace something greater than yourself. And that's what separated, I feel, Dr. King from other people. Because his focus was something greater. He came from a perspective of faith. He came from a perspective of understanding that we were endowed by our Creator. And that's what separated him from some of the others. Think about, how many of you know who Malcolm X is? Yeah, Malcolm X. And we've often heard very negative things about Malcolm X. And we call him violent, and we call him a radical. And people always compare Dr. King to Martin Luther King. Very different ways of doing things. I did a lot of studying on Malcolm X, and he was called violent, but he really wasn't associated with any violence. He was a part of the Nation of Islam. His mindset was, I'm not marching for equal rights, I'm not begging you for equal rights, and I'm not turning the other cheek when you treat me bad. I will, if you stick a dog on me, I'm going to shoot the dog. If you are hosing down my wife and kids, I'm going to do my best to kill you. And that, we go. But think about it. Which one was more radical? To me, it's natural. If you hit me, I hit you back. If you're sticking a dog on my child, I'm going to do what I can to protect my child. To me, that's just natural. But we made him out to be radical. Dr. King was the radical. To give love for hate. To forgive instead of being bitter. To be nonviolent no matter what. Malcolm X said it is impossible to be nonviolent with people who are violent with you. Dr. King said love, and turn the other cheek, and not to be bitter. That's radical. And that's what separated him from so many others. And he called all of it in action, not passivity. And a lot of people think of meekness as weakness. But he was a man of action. Do you agree? So where are we now? But as I stand, even though I said no, I don't believe we've reached it, I do want you to understand that I stand here today with an awareness as a black woman that there are people who paved the way for me to be where I am. That progress has been made. Having taught for over 17 years, not every day, but there were many a day where I stood there, and I shared this with my students, I stood there understanding that I was standing on the shoulders of people who had come before me, that there were ancestors who paid the price so that I could be there, that there was a time in history where it was illegal for black people to even be able to read, much less teach others to read, much less help others love to read. I understood that. I understood that it's an amazing thing. My ancestors could not wrap their brain around what I have already experienced. So yes, we are within the dream, you see, but we're not so far to go, I think, even now, because I feel like we've gone backwards. I think of the poem by Maya Angelou, the poet Maya Angelou, who just died within the last year, not even a year. And there's a poem called Still I Rise. And she ends the poem with these words. She says, out of the huts of history's shame, slavery, out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. I love this part. She says, leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Now check this out. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And if you were my students, I'd make you snap, because that's what you do after you hear the poem. But I understand that as I stand here. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I am everything that they would have wanted to be, that they would have dreamed to be if they could have even thought that far in human form. I am. And I realize that those who came before me, the Harriet Tubmans and the Frederick Douglasses, and the Medgar Evers and the Martin Luther Kings, and yes, even the Malcolm X's, I understand and I take that seriously, that I can go places and I can do things, and I rose from their ashes and from the blood and the sweat that they sacrificed. And I'm appreciative. By the grace of God, I am appreciative of it all, but we have not arrived. And I believe we put the car in reverse. And then we use Dr. King. There are some who use him to divide. Are you noticing that? Some so-called leaders, they use him to divide, to race bait, to profit off of tragedy, to pimp pain. And whether it's about Trayvon Martin, or whether it's about Michael Brown, or whether it's about Eric Garner, whether it's about the memory of Emmett Till, whether it's even people who take images of our president and his wife and physically alter them and say negative racial things about them, that's something too that people use in their race baiting. And I will say this. I didn't vote for him, and I don't know where you stand in terms of that, but I don't think the president is doing a good job, and he certainly doesn't have my support. Let's get that out the way. If he has yours, wonderful. But I will say this, that our substance, our issues are important enough, and we should feel on solid ground enough that we can make the issues, and we don't have to resort to anything else. To the physical things, and I've seen it. I know we like to think that everybody has the best of intentions, but everybody does not. And give them enough time and they'll show themselves. But I would say for the most part, in my experience, the opposition is because of the issues. But the race baiters will paint a whole different picture and keep us divided. Whether it's those who use America bashing to promote their agenda, or those who are in such a love fest with America that they won't acknowledge that we do have our faults. Whatever it is, some seek to divide rather than to unite, and they invoke Dr. King in that agenda. They march, they sing, you've seen them, you can name them. They sing, they march, they chant, they do all the things he did. The spirit isn't right, and we can see the results. So I submit to you, though vocal in his critique and even his criticism of America, Dr. King loved America. Was he disappointed in America? Yeah, he was. He said he was. But then he said this, there can be no great disappointment where there is no great love. You don't get disappointed. If you don't expect something from somebody, you're not disappointed. Just business as usual. When somebody's late all the time, you just expect them to be late. I'm so surprised you're late. No, you're just late. You're not disappointed. But when you see something greater, something that there's a love there, and therefore you're disappointed. So he said he loved it. He wanted to see one America, not a division, not you going your way. He said the American dream, that we would rise up and live out the true meaning of our creed. So it pains me to say that I don't think that we have gotten there, or that we've trampled on it, or even that we've gone backwards. And I believe that with the election of the first black president, we have gone backwards. That which seems that it would unite has served to do, I think, the opposite. Situations, I think, have become worse. And I hope this doesn't sound like a gloom and doom kind of speech, because it really isn't. But we need a reality check. And then we need to say, what do we do from here? That which should have brought us closer hasn't. So what did Dr. King's dream entail? He tackled the American dream. He tackled freedom. He tackled poverty. It wasn't just about a speech. He talked about voting. He talked about police brutality, violence, segregation, justice, character, hope, unity, education. He called it out. And maybe the I Have a Dream speech is one that we gravitate to, because it takes us from the depths of our current situation to the hope that he saw. If he just ended his speech on the down note, we were like, well, okay. But he saw something. He saw something to come. Take Ferguson and Michael Brown and Eric Garner and the 2 cops that were shot in New York City. Think about, have you seen those signs with the hashtag Black Lives Matter? Have you seen those? Yeah. We're living in what I consider dangerous times in race relations, because we're at the place where emotion rules the day. And that's always dangerous. One of my life philosophies is that I try not to ever make major decisions when I'm either way up or way down. Emotion rules the day. And that's dangerous. We continue to live where we allow so-called leaders and politicians to play on those emotions. And then we get this idea that we're just crying wolf, so you know, everything is racist. Right? Everybody's racist. You sneeze, you're racist. And then there are people who are so tired of being called racist that no matter the situation, they automatically reject it, even if race is an issue. Sort of like crying wolf. And both perspectives are false. I hear black and white people, often on the political left, say that race factors into everything. Every criticism, every question, every police shooting, everything. Then I hear people on the political right who say race factors are nothing. And then every time a black person is shot by a white person, and you call it out, then they say, they quote you statistics about how many times black people kill black people, as if one had anything to do with the other. And it doesn't serve any purpose. What we need to do is get past emotion and look at the facts. Hello? So I remember, it's like, it's a pain. We're trying to get past the pain. Why are people crying out all the time? Why is it everything is racist? Or why is it? Because we're trying to get past the pain of our history that we've not gotten past, that people have not released. I had a pastor once that used to say that you see somebody who once broke an arm and had a cast on it, but it got better and the time went by and the cast went off, and it's just so beautiful. It's a beautiful arm. It just looks like every other arm. But then somebody gets close to it and leans on it, and the person screams. You know why they scream? Because it wasn't healed. It looked good for a while, till the right thing comes along and touches it, and then they explode. And that's what we're seeing. That there's something there that's still there, that hasn't been healed. And there's no grand jury decision, and there's no law that man can devise that can heal us from ourselves. And I remember when Michelle Obama spoke in 2008 at the Democratic National Convention, and then Obama spoke 3 days later, which was the 45th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And I remember sitting in my living room and listening to her talk about him, and he was accepting the nomination on that 45th anniversary. And I sat there and listened to her, and I cried. And I didn't cry because it was like, oh wow, it was wonderful. I cried because I thought, look at where we've come. And yet I can't cast that vote. Because we didn't line up. And I would have loved to have been able to do that. But there are some things more important than color. That was what Dr. King was saying. And his dream was that we would one day live in a nation where we would not be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And I had a student during that time who had asked me, who are you going to vote for? He said, please vote for Obama. He's going to be the first. He's the first black. I said, well, you know, let me tell you something. We got on the other side, we have someone who would be the first woman vice president. I'm just as much a woman as I am a black person. So I better figure out what the issues are, and I better vote accordingly. You hear me? And then I lamented after the election because I felt, and I know this is not the case for everyone, but I felt that people had made a decision, many, based on the color of skin, rather than the content of character. And that's not the goal. I don't believe Dr. King's dream was just so that we could have a black president. Do I think he would have thought, that's great? Well, sure, that we had gotten to that point. I mean, that I had never thought I'd see a black president in my lifetime. I just have to tell you. And the fact that we've gotten there, yeah, sure, to go from the place where we could not vote at all, to getting the right to vote, to running on a ticket and asking people to vote for you, to voting in the black president, you can't say that progress has not been made. Sure. But are we judging by the content of character? Or does skin color matter that much even still? And this is what I found. And again, this is why I say we have far to go. We are at the point now where you can't criticize our president or other black politicians because they're black. And so, and this is why I said, I'm going to share some it may be uncomfortable, but because they're black, because we've got to coddle. Listen, I coach girls varsity basketball, won a couple championships too. And I just threw that out there. And so, if I can't coach your child the way I coach everybody else, because I have to coddle your child, and if your child makes a mistake and I can't say, listen, you've made a mistake and treat them like everyone else, that's a disrespect to the child. What I'm saying is that I don't think that that child has what it takes to withstand the same scrutiny that everybody else has to deal with. And so when we say you can't criticize the president, or you're racist if you do, what I really am saying is that he's not at the same standard as everyone else. So we must treat him differently, which is in itself racist. You hear what I'm saying? And black people do. Black conservatives deal with this all the time. Whether you're talking about Colonel Allen West, or whether you're talking about Congresswoman Mia Love, or whether you're talking about former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, or Senator Tim Scott, whatever, they often are called tokens. Or Adrienne Ross. They're often called tokens. And if you achieve any measure of success, a lot of times it's because they wanted a photograph with you in it. So that, we took that picture earlier, it was like, I didn't want to get the black girl in and put her in the picture. Now, when somebody can't wrap their brain around the fact that you've achieved a measure of success because you deserved it, what does that say about what they're thinking about you?
Yeah, that's right.
Right? If I was president, I would want the same measuring stick as everybody else. Why? Because I deserve it. Hello? Because I deserve it. I'm going to skip through some of this. I said I could go on and on. I've been working all day. But unless we get this thing together, we're going to see more violence. Dr. King said, and those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam, think about what's been going on. The violence. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. And there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwind of revolt will continue to shape the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. And I'm not saying that what we're seeing is justified at all, but I'm saying we need to make a change. And we need to have conversations of what that looks like. And we've got leaders that jeopardize that, quote-unquote leaders, self-appointed. Here's what Dr. King also said: the marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead us to distrust all white people. Some of these leaders speaking in his name need to read this. Must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that this destiny, their destiny, is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We've got to go forward. And we've got to do it together. And we can't let bitterness get in the way. And we can't say screw it. Because let me tell you, that's what some people are saying now. I've seen, there are some people who say, you know what, no matter what I say, no matter what I do, I'm a racist. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, I'm a sellout. So you know what, screw it all. And then you got black people, others are saying, you know what, they are racist. So you know what, I'm just going to be with them. I'm just going to act out. Dr. King said, we cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. I want to, and I know we can talk about physical living arrangements, but there's the largest ghetto, a place of bondage is probably that mental place in which we live. And I want to say first, Black lives matter. You know what? First of all lives matter. All men are created equal. Second of all, do I need you to tell me that? When we're at the point where I need a sign in 2015, where I need a hashtag and a sign and a slogan to declare what should be self-evident, it says something about me. I'm still in need of your validation. I'm still looking for somebody. Listen, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. This is 2015. You haven't figured that out yet? You see that's the inner turmoil that still exists. And until we deal with it, it's the same old mess, because it's not about what you can give me. It's me coming to understand who I am. It's me coming to understand what should be self-evident. It's me coming to understand that all men were created equal. But once I'm looking for you to tell me that, I'm already lost. I don't need a hashtag. Other parts of that mental ghetto. I worked in the schools. You hear black kids, and I said, this is uncomfortable for me. But I gotta be real. You don't hear black people use the N-word toward each other? And I go, and I've shared, and I go, Dr. King's dream, is that what his dream was? Is that what he gave himself for? Is that what others gave themselves for? So that we could walk down the hall and say, what's up, Ma? Mental ghetto that we're still in. I've heard black people, and this is really uncomfortable, but I often have heard black people look at other black people and say, that's why you're so black. Have you ever heard that? I said, man, I've never seen black people like, yeah, we heard it. I've never heard white people say, you know what, you're just so white. Oh, white and pasty. I mean, well, you just don't hear that. And listen, I've been able in the classroom to say things that other teachers couldn't say because I was the only black teacher in a very diverse district. In fact, the first time I walked into the school, got out of my car and walked up the walkway, and there was a crowd of students around, and black students, and they applauded. Because even though we need the best teachers, we need the best teachers also we need students to be able to look at somebody and say, I know I can do it because I see it's being done. Yeah. And there's something to be said for saying I can do it, because if I've never seen it done, I don't think it can be done. And they clapped and they applauded. But you're so black. Look how black and crusty you are. You know, it's okay to laugh. It's so pathetic. And I said to students, that's such a self-hatred. And I often said the most despicable thing, the most painful thing, the most, I don't know, thing, whatever word, whatever adjective you can come up with, about slavery or about racism is not what they thought about us. It's about what it caused us to think about ourselves. That I can look at somebody who looks like me in essence and say, look how black you are.